Hi everyone, I'm Chloe. I top forward the most recent Elestrals app tournament with Heelstall, and so I'm going to be doing a deck profile. I'll be going over some deck theory. I'll talk about my run a little bit, and I will, of course, provide some thoughts on how I think the ban list will affect this deck going forward. Since we just got one this morning, I was going to record this a couple of days ago, and it kind of got away from me, and now, here I am recording a deck profile for a format that's not going to exist in 2 weeks. So before I start talking about the deck, I'm going to go through a little bit of theory. So this deck basically came about as a solution to Jayax's 5s list that he topped the last 2 webcam events with. Josh, also known as Bean Soldier TV, came up with this deck idea, and I was super sold on it kind of from minute one, with the idea being that you have a 40 to 50 card spirit deck on average compared to a normal 20. And that means that all of your trades are almost always favorable, especially when you play super mana efficient cards. So the idea being, you never run out of mana, and your opponent does. In that way, I don't think this, stall is necessarily a correct word for what this deck does. It tends to be a very aggressive deck, where, you want to poke for damage with, Sluggles or Quackles or whatever you have whenever you can. And I would honestly describe this is going to sound kind of silly, I would describe this as more of a burn deck, because the idea behind this deck is that you let your opponent burn themselves while you basically recur all your resources for. Your opponent won't have the amount of resources to keep up with you, and they will eventually just kill themselves by playing the game at you. If they decide not to play the game, then you literally just hit them with Sluggles until they have to. I think this deck concept is really strong, and I'm really happy I brought it. There's a couple changes I'll make. I'll go over those in the deck profile. And then to start off, the deck profile, of course, here we have the 3 Sluggle, the 3 Quackle, and we have, of course, 2 Dratagua. So this is the preferred ratio of healers. These are, of course, the cards that will be winning you the game most of the time. These 2 heal 3, this one heals 2. The reason why we're playing Dratagua is because it fits best in color, and when you can trigger it more than once in a row, if your opponent lets it live a turn, you can just re-trigger it forever. Usually, if you're in that position, you're winning the game on the spot. This card is super good for establishing dominating game states. We have our 3 Ambrosia, of course. This is also a healer. Card is super important in this deck. Spirit management is really difficult, and so holding Ambrosias for a pretty long period of time until you absolutely need to use them is pretty crucial. From here on out, we're going to be showing some removal. So the concept of this deck is that these are the healers, and then the rest of the deck is almost entirely removal. So we have 3 Eddie, and we have 3 Boombat. Now, the logic behind these guys is that they are monsters that are just removal spells, right? So Eddie and Boombat are 2 of the most mana-efficient removal cards in the game. 1 mana almost always kill a guy. Or, if in the case of Boombat or Eddie, they're almost always forcing something like a Gorgons or a shield or, some sort of response, which is burning your opponent, which means they're losing spirits, which is good for you. They almost always have to go at a spirit negative to stop these cards from resolving. And even if they don't resolve, you're never really that beat up about it, because your opponent is going to have to spend more mana than you did. We have the 3 Earthquake, of course, now limited to 1. We have 3 Cryoblast, which was honestly MVP. This card hits so many decks, it hits so many cards, it is kind of unreal. We have 3 Resting on Your Laurels, also now limited to 1. And we have 3 Shield of Achilles. And that is our full removal suite. So this deck is on 18 removal spells. I count Shield as a removal spell because it's almost like a finisher for the deck, right? Shield doesn't get a whole lot of value early. Usually it's just protecting you from bigger guys sometimes. But in the late game, when your opponent is down to 3 or 4 spirits and you shield one of their guys, that almost always wins you the game on the spot. So 18 removal spells on top of all the healers, and then I'll go over sort of the general utility cards, which is 3 Ash Rabbit, needs no explanation, and 2 Ash Rabbit. This is going to go up to 3 in the future for sure. This card is so crazy. I cannot imagine a future where I don't play this card. We have 3 Nectar of the Gods. Because you're healing so much, this card is functionally free. It is free, it gives you a bunch of card advantage. Super, super impactful in the mirror especially. and 3 Tsunami. Realistically, this should have been PTA. I got on the train of this deck a little bit late, and so I kind of landed on the same main deck that Bean Soldier did, which in testing felt very good. But the Tsunamis were there to address cards like Viscerus and like the Bears, which has a surprisingly good matchup into this deck. Tsunamis, like they help you they help you push off threats that if they get in will result in huge tempo swings. But almost always, PTA does a similar, if not the exact same thing, and it is more removal, especially given now that we have less Earthquakes and less Restings. This should definitely be PTAs. And then I'll go on to the Spirit deck here. So Spirit deck, we are on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We are on 7 Water Spirits. So this is because we have both Dratagwa and Sluggle. We want to play more Water Spirits than any other type of Spirit. This is usually your go-to when you're taking damage. We have 5 Thunder Spirits. This one is a little bit more difficult to manage, in my opinion, because there's a card in the board that I'll show you that requires very, very specific management of your Thunder Spirits especially. Because if you resolve a Quackle and you use your last Thunder Spirit and they Gorgons it, you have to Amber to get your Thunders back in rotation, which can be super, super bad, especially in the late game. We have, of course, the 4 Earth Spirits. This will be going down to 2, but it's just for the Earthquakes. Not really much explanation needed there. And then we have 2 Floor Mine and 2 Vipyro. These are for Ash Rabbit and for Cryoblast, respectively. Pretty standard spirit math for those cards. So I'm going to go over the side deck here soon. And I think that this is the biggest difference between mine and the other healed decks that topped this tournament, or like didn't top in the case of Super Insane, who got 9th place and bubbled. I think that my side deck theory is a little bit more sound, especially for the mirror. But, you know, I'll just get right into it, I guess. So the first card that we have here is going to be 3 copies of Lavalith. I currently don't own Lavalith, so please bear with me here. And then the 2 Fire Spirits to go with that. So the idea here, basically, is that Lavalith is a tool that sort of checks your hardest matchups. Post-board, Earth Nexus has a lot of options that can, like, actually screw you really hard. Stuff like Verdolith or stuff like Rummagem are all very annoying to deal with. And especially for the Chronodile matchup, if they stick Chronodile and you don't have access to Lavalith, the game is almost immediately over. It's super hard to deal with. You basically have to hard draw into Dense Fog or this to win that matchup. So I decided to play 3, and then in most matchups I was just bringing in 2, but into Chronodile I brought in the 3rd because it was so important. And then of course the Fire Spirits just to help with the math. You would take out 2 Water Spirits when you do this, and you just have to manage them a little bit more carefully. We have 3 Gorgon Skays. This was a sort of respect sideboard for the FTK. I don't think there's another matchup where I brought this in. I just really felt like that this card basically only existed for the FTK, which is also now not legal, so this is not necessary in future sideboards, I believe. We have 2 copies of Smoltuga. Now, this is really where my sideboard theory starts to sort of differ. Smoltuga is a very flexible card in this deck. It is an answer to both the Heal Mirror and to Galaxy 5s, which this deck has an immense problem with. So the theory behind Smoltuga is that in the Heal Mirror, you would just play your Smoltuga, search an Ash Rabbit. Instead of siding the 3rd Ash Rabbit for the mirror, you just side essentially 4 copies of it by playing the Smoltugas. But Smoltuga is also a 5-body, which means they have to use EQ, Boombat, or Resting to kill it. Since the Healists weren't maining PTA. So you're forcing your opponent to use extremely valuable removal just to get over this so they can start swinging in to force you to play the game. And on top of that, you can summon an attack and then threaten to crash into a Galaxy, which is this deck's like biggest weakness, is that you have to... Galaxy kind of screws you super hard. It turns off Eddie. It makes Dratagwa like a really weird card to use. It is just a weird... It's just a really hard card for this deck to deal with. So Smoltuga checks that by just summoning Smoltuga and attack, threaten to crash. If they shield it, then you just summon it next turn and search a second Ash Rabbit and then threaten to crash again. The pressure, both offensive and defensive, that Smoltuga provides is super unmatched, and I was really happy with how this performed. So yeah, I would play this again for sure. Okay, so now we have 2 more cards. These are going to be Arcoliths. I do not own Arcoliths, unfortunately, but these are Arcoliths. Arcolith was a concession for the mirror. Momoflora and I, shout out to Momoflora, really did help me a lot with this sideboard theory. Theorized that basically the mirror is not defined by deck out like Bean Soldier and Super Insane believe so. But I believe the mirror is decided by board presence and tempo. If you can force your opponent to spend a bunch of spirits on removal, or you can force your opponent into a position where they need to remove your threats, you are winning the game. So Arcolith sort of helps with that. It is a big body that swings for a huge number in the late game. If they shield it, they're taking 3. But the most important thing this card does is it is a pseudo healer, which lets you go over the top again in the mirror. What I'll usually do is I will hold the Arcolith until I need to, and then I would play the Arcolith, and then I would immediately play, let's say, for example, a Nectar of the Gods from hand from the Arcolith, which gives you a free draw too, basically. So your opponent has another body they have to deal with, you've got a bunch of free advantage, and you're swinging with your big body for a lot of damage, which prompts an immediate response. So if they have something like a Tsunami, they have to use it. If they have something like a Shield, they're taking 3. I thought it was a really good card. I threw playing a second one in my top 4 game, but I still do think this card is very strong in this deck. And the last card, I mentioned it earlier, is the 2 Dense Fog and the Owloon. This was another concession for the Chronodile matchup. The idea that Dense Fog can negate Chronodile, which allows you to remove it, it was good. I also brought this into some other matchups, like Nexus matchups. I thought this card was pretty okay in. It wasn't, amazing. I didn't see any Chronodile, so it didn't really do a whole lot, in regards to that. But I think the card was good, and I'd probably still play it in the board. And that's the deck. I'm going to go over my run here a little bit and sort of talk about what I liked and didn't like about this deck. So I actually did lose my round 1. I lost it against a Water 5 deck playing Galaxy, the top 8 list, actually, the list that top 8'd. Not JJPMs, but the other one. And game 1, the deck basically did what it was supposed to. Game 2, I should have judge called my opponent, and I didn't, because they didn't pick whether they wanted to go first or second fast enough, and I ended up getting stuck with first, and then they just said, let's roll with it, so I did. And I sort of panicked, made some bad plays there, and then game 3 I didn't draw any removal besides Cryoblast, which does nothing while Galaxy is on the board. So I ended up losing that round. I played against, in sequence, Spider 5's Earth Nexus, and I won all those. It was 2-0, 2-1, 2-1 respectively. Not really a whole lot happened in these games. The last Earth Nexus game was kind of funny. I couldn't beat Tribute Verdolith over Verdolith, because they healed so much that I kind of just ran out of gas before they did. It was very funny. So my round 5, I played against Super Insane, who was also on heal. And I believe that this is the match where my sideboard theory is shown the most. Smoltuga's especially made a super big impact in this game. Or in these games, I guess. I definitely won game 2 almost single-handedly off of my sideboard theory. I knew they were going to be on Lumarus, so I was able to play around them effectively by doing stuff like holding shields and not committing into the board, or when I commit into the board, aggressively crashing into the rabbits and such. It was really, really good. I felt like it was great, and then game 3 we ended up going into time, and I held a bunch of Ambrosias and a Sluggle in my hand, and then I went Sluggle, Ambro on my last turn, field for 8, and then we ended up winning in time because of that. So that was a really stressful game, but I really believe that my board theory kind of shone through there. And then round 6 I played against JJPM on traditional 5s, and I kind of washed him because that's what this deck is supposed to do. It's supposed to beat 5s super hard, and it just did that. It's a really hard matchup, and it was a really great game. And then top cut, I got top 8. My top 8 game was against the exact same person I played against for my round 6, which was JJPM, and I 2-0'd them again because that matchup was impossible for 5s. My top 4 game, I played against Bean Soldier with the mirror, and I ended up throwing a little bit in game 2, but I think I realistically lost the game even before that. I was a little exhausted. I've never really top cutted an event like this before. I was kind of running a little thin. Our game 1 was very close, took 20 to 30, no, it was like 25 to 35 minutes, something in that range. And it came very down to the wire. And then at the very end, I like overcommitted to my board and got cooked for it. Obviously, amazing player. He's gonna post a deck profile soon. You should go check it out. I believe it's at the Elestrals. So go check that out. But yeah, that's my tournament run. A little rambly, sorry, but that's that. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the ban list here and how I think it's gonna affect the deck. So losing these cards is a really big deal. It may not seem like a huge deal at first. You know, you could possibly just throw in 3 PTAs and the 3rd rabbit and then call it a day. The issue with doing that is that one of the reasons why this deck works so well is because you have access to these generic tools, right? Like, stuff like Earthquake and Resting are both super, super, super impactful cards, and they're super generic, right? They work against everything. Losing copies of Earthquake and Resting means that your outs to bigger creatures, like consistently hitting the board, stuff like Rhino Sects or stuff like Rabbits even, it becomes a lot harder to deal with those threats, which means you're going to be playing much longer games with this deck, and it's going to be much closer than it normally would be. I think I'm going to have to do a lot of testing and deck theory on these cards specifically to see what I want to replace them with. But I'm not sure. I honestly, I feel like this deck is going to get significantly worse after this. I think it'll still be like, you know, maybe like bottom of tier 1, maybe tier 2, because I think the core of the deck is still really strong. But I think that it will have a much harder time against a sort of larger variety of decks. All right, so yeah, that's my deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. I don't know if I'll be posting like an updated list. I still have to work on it a lot, and I'm a pretty busy person. So I don't know if I'll be able to get that out, but I still wanted to just record this and get my thoughts out there before it gets too much like after the ban list to for this to sort of be relevant. And I hope you guys enjoy.